Every town has an urban legend. A story about a half-crazed creature who haunts Lover's Lane. His victims vanish into thin air with little but a few drops of blood to suggest what their gruesome fate might have been.
Prince George's County, Maryland is just a stone's throw down the highway from Washington, D.C. Stories about an axe-wielding fiend, half man, half goat, who haunts the wooded areas, has been part of the local folklore since the last century. There have been enough mysterious missing persons cases, gruesome discoveries, to make people wonder whether Goatman is just a myth, a local boogeyman, or something more sinister.
The Goatman legend. It's kind of something we all grew up with. The difference with us is we perceive it as more of a paranormal event versus a physical creature. Is there a half man, half goat somewhere out here in these woods? I don't know. That's why we're here. The majority of the witness accounts that we've read, they're never consistent on what the Goatman looks like. So our theory is that the Goatman is a ghost or an apparition that appears differently to different people. You know, there's all kinds of stories, and I don't know the truth or any of the evidence around these stories about missing people and abductions and stuff like that, but the truth of the matter is if you've got a missing person, the case is unsolved, so nobody really knows for sure. So what we've done is we've kind of assembled a team here tonight. I've got Steve here, he's my cameraman. We also did something a little strange that you might think is weird. Because the Goatman story kind of revolves around animals, we brought a goat out with us. And the idea is that hopefully this goat will draw in some of that energy of that apparition that we believe is out here. And accompanying our goat is Wendy, and Wendy's our psychic.
As a child, I was always able to kind of have a sense of who was calling on the phone or, you know, what the next song on the radio would be. I think it's just a matter of being open to these things, being aware kind of the other plane so that these beings are comfortable communicating with you and being able to kind of receive the communication. So, you know, hopefully I'll be able to help out tonight.
Now, I know what people think, but I'm not crazy. I swear I saw Goatman. My girlfriend and I were up at this place, I guess you'd call it Lover's Lane, one night, and we just had gone up there to get some privacy. Anyway, so we were up there, and there was another car parked up there that night, and they were sort of involved, if you know what I mean. So everything was quiet for a while, but then something catches my attention out of the corner of my eye. It's dark at this point, but there is a full moon, so it's not pitch black yet. And I look, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was this tall guy, really weird looking, hunched over. Something just wasn't right about him, and I thought, Goatman. And I know, it sounds crazy, but that's what I thought. And he had something heavy in his hand, and you know, legend says that Goatman carries an axe. So anyways, he's walking towards this other car, and they're sort of occupied, and thought I'd take it upon myself to honk the horn and warn them, right? So I do that, I'm honking the horn, and they turn on their car and turn on their lights. And this car just bolts out of there, right? And then this guy turns his attention to us, and he starts walking towards the truck, right? My girlfriend's screaming, I'm trying to turn over the truck, and nothing's happening. I'm turning it over, nothing's happening. My girlfriend's freaking out, and I'm starting to freak out. Just in the nick of time, the truck starts, and I slam it into drive and just peel out of there. Just as I'm pulling away, the creature takes a swing at my car. And I don't know, but all I do know is this dent wasn't in my truck before that night.
It seems that, from what I've learned, people have been talking about the Goatman for well over 50 years. Just recently have people started getting back into the legend, back into the historical events of what's happened with the Goatman in Maryland. It seems like the Goatman is attracted to areas that are wooded Also places such as lovers' lanes where teenagers go to hang out on the weekends. It appears the reason that he likes these places is because they're very secluded and out of the way of people. And if people do happen to trespass into his domain, reports have it that he's liable to massacre them with his axe.
Almost every culture in what we think of as the Western world has a myth of some kind of goat-man hybrid. There are two that you will recognize immediately. The Greek god Pan has the lower body of a goat and the upper body of a very hairy man. Pan was the god of pastures, woods, meadows, natural places. But Pan also has, shall we say, a more menacing side. The half-man, half-animal is really a marriage of intellect, reason, with the more chaotic, less predictable natural world. Really, what we're talking about here are animal instincts. The lower body, which is the goat, really symbolically represents sex at its most base. And Pan certainly had the reputation of a lusty god. Then there's the most extreme combination of man and goat in the devil, Satan. There's nothing redeeming about this figure. In Satan, the animal side is not just lust, but a perversion of lust. So we have the other side of the coin. The animal instincts in this Satan image are always a twist away from what is human, towards pure evil.
The goat here, Muppet, is, we're using her as kind of a lure. We hope that, like I said earlier, with the animal connection with the goat man, that whatever energy is in this area will kind of be drawn to the goat. And that's why we brought her here. So we're gonna leave her here.
I'm getting a very strange sensation here. It's like there's a lot of entities and they're all talking at once, and there's a lot of fear and sadness, as if something awful happened to them here, and they're telling us to leave. But I don't think it's out of anger or a threat, but it's a warning. They're telling us to leave.
All right.
When it comes to Goatman, we don't have a lot of physical evidence. We have to rely on a lot of eyewitness accounts, and one story in particular is from the 1970s about a young girl's dog that went missing, and the dog's name was Ginger.
In 1971, I was a 20-year-old university student. I was rooming with the Orman family for the summer. They had a daughter named Natalie, a lovely girl, and they had given her a golden retriever by the name of Ginger. She was a spirited little dog, and I really liked her. Anyway, my girlfriend April dropped by to visit me one day, and after supper we decided to go for a walk. And as we were walking back home, we noticed a man running through an open field. You know, the local kids around here, they used to joke about this myth of a goat man. I never really thought very much of it until then. Well, this guy, he was really tall, and he moved very oddly. When I think of it, he kind of moved like a mental patient or something. Well, we must have startled him because he took off for the trees. And the creepiest thing was that before he made it there, he made this noise. It's been 30 years and I still can't describe it. It's because it wasn't human. Definitely wasn't human. The next day, the Orman girl was crying because she couldn't find her dog. So April and I decided to help her look for it. We were walking and calling its name. When we got down by the railroad tracks, we noticed something up ahead. It looked like a small animal, but it wasn't moving. As we got closer, I realized that we were in trouble. Now, this isn't very pleasant, but what we found was Ginger's head. It had been severed clean off her body. What was worse is that we couldn't find the rest of her. Couldn't find her body. We looked for it. There wasn't even a blood trail. You know, a lot of people say that, you know, a dog or a coyote did this, but they would have left a big mess. Whatever or whoever did this, he did it really cleanly, really neatly. Ginger's head was severed by something very sharp, like an axe. Well, just then I noticed there was a figure out by the tree line. It was dark. I could make out that it was a man. I immediately thought that it was that guy that we saw a couple of days ago. But then it held up what I swear was an axe. Then it made this sound. It's the same sound I'd heard 2 days ago. Believe you me, I never wanted to hear that sound again. The only thought in my mind was getting the hell out of there. It really scared us. It really did.
Ginger wasn't the only missing animal report at that time. There was an outbreak of lots of missing animals, which sparked more interest in the Goatman.
The sad fate of Ginger, the golden lab, and presumably the other missing pets, revealed a side to the Goatman that is more than just menacing. Goatman attacks his victims with discriminating viciousness. He has a particular hatred for family pets. Stray dogs are the most vulnerable, but humans are also at risk.
Over here. What is it? It's a skeleton.
Okay, there are several predators around here. We've got coyotes and we've got black bear, and this is a canine, a dog. And supposedly in the legend, the Goatman, he doesn't like dogs. He has an issue with them. And so here's a dog, and that's a little unnerving.
Well, the Goatman is known by legend to kill dogs and people. And if this is a dog...
According to my research, in the 1930s, a woman by the name of Mary Sullivan and her infant child went missing. Soon after that, the father and the younger son also went missing as well. It's like someone was stalking the family and picking them off one by one. The family went missing in the woods on their property, and it is still the place where they see the Goatman to this day.
Well, I did some research into the origins of Goatman, and there are a lot of stories about who he was and how he became that way. Back in the 30s and 40s, the state of Maryland decided to dam the Patuxent River and make a couple of lakes. This was to be the source of drinking water for the area. It was a big operation. It meant that a nearby town would be underwater, so the state came in and moved its citizens, relocated them. But the legend goes that in doing its research, the state officials forgot one man, a goat farmer. And when the operation happened, this farmer was caught by surprise and couldn't save his precious goats and died trying. Now they say he's come back and his ghost lives in the woods and takes his revenge out mostly on family pets, but also on human beings.
Some people say Goatman is an urban legend, but I know lots of people that have lost cats and dogs. Some people themselves even disappear, which is even stranger. The cop said 2 kids from my class just got on a bus and left town, ran away from home. Now that doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, why didn't they take their cars? And why did they just leave them out here in the middle of nowhere? Somebody's not telling the whole truth.
In the late 50s, there was a family living in Mitchellville called the Glasses. They had a little boy named Bobby. One night he was playing outside in the backyard and his father came out to sit on the back porch. It was getting late, but he could see someone was standing not far from the yard, into the woods a bit. There was something about him that was frightening, so they called the boy in.
Boy, get in the house. Now!
The father yelled at the guy, but he didn't leave.
Hey, you! Get out of here! Ha!
The father started walking towards him. The man let out some kind of a howl, not quite like an animal, but not quite human either. Then it slipped away into the night, but whatever this thing was, it came back.
I was just a little boy, but I remember it like it was yesterday. I woke up one night because something was scraping at the window. I looked up, and there was this thing staring into the window at me, scraping at the glass. I screamed.
Dad! Dad! Dad!
My dad ran in, and the thing took off. He went after it, but it was gone. I know what I saw, and it wasn't a person. Next day, he was looking around, and there were footprints, but they weren't human. It was like a horse had been walking through a yard, hoof prints.
Go back in the house, son. I said go!
We saw it off and on for a week or two, and then it was gone, and we never saw it again. My dad didn't scare easy. I mean, he was a Korean War vet who won the Bronze Star. But this thing scared the hell out of him. That really terrified me. Look, I don't know much about Goatman. You can call it whatever you want. Whatever I saw, it wasn't human.
It was later that I linked the two events together and realized how lucky the Glass family had been. The land their house is built on is the same property that the Sullivan family owned back in the 1930s, the family that disappeared. Fortunately, the Glass family didn't join them on the missing persons list. In the end, the legacy of Goatman isn't one of a gentle creature lost in the woods, as benign as Bigfoot. We've had mysterious disappearances that remain unsolved.
I'm getting a really bad feeling here. It's like it's hard for me to breathe, and my lungs feel like they're being squeezed. And I'm feeling communications from entities different from the ones before. These are telling us to leave, but it's in a very malevolent way. And I think I better go. I'm gonna listen to them right now, and I'm gonna go.
The Maryland reports of Goatman are really interesting, even if you just look at them from the psychological point of view. We're talking about a part of the world that was once very rural. So you have this kind of clash of the modern world pushing out the natural world. And Goatman is an interesting symbol, a man who has been taken over by base nature, who seems to dislike anything that represents normal life. You know, family pets and things like that. His drawl to Lover's Lane is again a part of the whole thing, where he is pure, uncontrolled, natural impulses. It's a threat that runs deep in the human psyche.
That's great. We've just lost our another battery. It's our third battery tonight. This is actually kind of typical on these investigations. Spirit energy tends to really drain our battery sources pretty quickly. And like I said, that's battery number 3, and unfortunately, that's the last battery we have out here with us. So. Oh my God. Oh, Jesus.
Maybe this wasn't such a good idea, Sean.
You know, guys, I apologize for this, but this is really bad. This is, oh my God. I think we should probably get out of here. I think we should evacuate this area and just write this off to a lesson learned. Sorry, guys, I really am. That was the most terrifying experience of my life. Look, I love doing these things, but you know what? That was way too dangerous, and I'm never coming back here again.
The Goatman is real. I believe he's real. Lots of people believe he's real. And if you don't believe he's real, come out to Prince George's County, stroll down Lover's Lane at night, and see for yourself.
The Rocky Mountains in Canada are a hotspot for Sasquatch sightings. Do these massive, hairy, man-like creatures really exist? Just ask any of the hundreds of people who believe they have encountered one or heard its eerie howl in the wilderness.
A friend of mine and I were walking outside of the camp down along the stream, and we were worried about falling into the holes, so that's what we were talking about, watching the ground. And all of a sudden we heard some noises, some branches breaking, like up in the trees. So we looked up in the tree with our flashlights and shone them around a little bit, and all of a sudden we caught sight of this thing that could have been a bear, but it wasn't a bear. It was big. It was like 7 foot tall, and it looked like an ape type of thing. And it had Irish setter kind of hair, even that kind of texture, that length, and it even had a sort of a smell to it. And it was scary looking, but all of a sudden it jumped out of the tree, right down in front of us. And we just we were for a second afraid. It seemed like it was going to lunge almost, but it didn't. Then it seemed almost like it wasn't aggressive. So we took off anyway. We started running, and as we were running, it was running the other way, but screaming, making a screaming noise, like as if it was a woman being murdered. Freaky sound. That's what it sounded like, of a woman being murdered, or maybe a baby crying, real unusual sounding. Never heard anything like it before. Never saw anything like it before.
Almost everybody who's seen Bigfoot says the same thing. It's a giant. It's covered in hair, not fur, hair. And it has no neck and walks with a distinctive rolling gait. And it runs as fast as a horse. But when it leaves something special behind, an intense, disagreeable stench.
I've been actively researching the Sasquatch question since about 1979. That'd be about 27 years. But I've been obsessed with this ongoing mystery ever since I was old enough to read. The most interesting pair of these castings are the ones that I've been called the Bosberg cripple, because you're looking at the bottom of the feet here. And you can see by the distortion in the foot that this is a crippled individual. Now, the anatomy suggested by the two bulges on the other edge suggests that this was a foot designed with different leverage. In other words, this is the way a human foot would be designed if it was natural for humans to weigh between 600 and 800 pounds.
One of the most remarkable Sasquatch encounters occurred in the early 1900s. Albert Osterman was a lumberman on a camping trip. A native trail guide had warned him about a legendary hairy creature called a Sasquatch, but Osterman didn't give it much thought. His first night at camp was disturbed repeatedly by sounds around his campsite. Osterman assumed it was just wildlife and eventually ignored it. A few nights later, Osterman went out for some night hunting. When he got back to camp, he discovered his campsite had been ransacked. It didn't appear to be the work of ordinary animals, but there were no humans around for miles. Shortly afterward, he discovered just what had been stalking his campsite. The creature had picked him up in his sleeping bag and dragged him for 3 hours to a small cave where he was eventually dumped in a heap. His kidnapper was a beast more than 8 feet tall. When Osterman regained consciousness, he discovered he had not just one captor, but an entire colony of the giant hairy creatures.
It's all right.
Osterman tried to flee, but his kidnapper would not allow him to escape, standing guard over him and the entire lair. The terrified man was never harmed by these creatures. They seemed more curious than threatening, even sharing their food with Osterman, who by now was hungry enough to accept. For 6 days and nights, Osterman was a prisoner to this colony of Sasquatch. Then Osterman thought of an escape plan.
Wait. Look. Look. Taste.
He took out his tobacco tin and took a small pinch, then offered the tin to the creature, who swallowed its entire contents and eventually became violently ill. Osterman seized the moment to make his escape. He didn't tell anyone about his experience for 30 years, afraid no one would believe him.
The maps you're looking at right here are northern and southern Alberta maps, and these are all incidents that I've personally looked into. The blue pins are sighting reports, the red pins are footprint findings, and the numbers you see on each pin indicates which file this particular instance is associated with. I spent 24 years researching the Sasquatch in western Alberta and eastern British Columbia before I moved to Mission, British Columbia.
Well, a few years ago, my boyfriend Lex and I decided that we were going to go on a camping trip for the weekend. So we packed up our dog King and headed to the Alberta woods. A few hours into the trip, it's getting pretty cold and getting pretty dark, so we found a good spot and set up camp. We headed into the tent and laid down for a little while, but it just seemed a little too quiet, you know? So we peeked our head out of the tent, and it was the weirdest thing. King was just staring off into the woods, really, really quiet, with this blank look on his face. We couldn't hear anything, so we thought nothing of it and went back to bed. But then, in the middle of the night, King was going crazy. Just barking and jumping, and what could it have been? Then all of a sudden, we heard a yelp, and then it was silent. That same silence again. So, we went out of the tent, and all we saw was blood and bones. I thought maybe it was a grizzly bear, or what else could there have been in the woods at that time? But then Lex looked down. What he saw was a huge, almost like a human footprint in the snow. I didn't believe in them before, but I definitely do now. And I know that it was a Sasquatch that took our King.
In 1957, William Rowe came closer than any other witness to the creature in the mountains west of Jasper. He made a sworn affidavit to an Edmonton official shortly afterwards. This is a transcript of his testimony.
My first impression was of a huge man, about 6 feet tall, almost 3 feet wide, weighing somewhere near 300 pounds. It was covered from head to foot with dark brown hair. He was very close, with ears shaped like a human's, but eyes small and dark like a bear's, and a neck thicker and shorter than any human. I watched him closely as he stripped a branch of its leaves. Then he caught my scent. He looked surprised and backed off, not afraid, just not wanting contact. I leveled my rifle thinking I would have a specimen of great interest to scientists the world over. But when the retreating creature turned and looked at me, I lowered my weapon. I would never forgive myself for shooting something that seemed so human.
This is all speculation based on eyewitness reports, but I tend to think there is, for every 100 bear in every given area, there's probably one Sasquatch. Anywhere between 200 and 2,000 between the Rockies and the West Coast.
My buddy and I were hiking in the woods when there was something in the bushes about 40 feet away. I heard this whistle like I've never heard before. It was human-like, but very commanding. And then that's when this creature come out on its 2 legs, 6 or 7 feet tall, covered with hair. This is so weird, but we saw a second one. It was big and hefty, over 7 feet tall, just as hairy as the other one, and it was walking towards some trees. Everybody told me what I saw was probably a bear, but no way. It was walking on its hind legs, it was huge, and it was hairy. It was not a bear. Without a doubt, it was a Bigfoot. Definitely a Bigfoot.
Now, the Rocky Mountains of Alberta, even though they don't have the volume of reports that we do here in the west coast of British Columbia, there is a long history of reporting encounters with the Sasquatch in and around the Rockies of Alberta. And the most common area in Alberta seems to be north and south of Highway 11 between Rocky Mountain House and Banff National Park, in and around the Bighorn Dam. And hopefully one day before too long we'll find an answer to this mystery and solve this question once and for all.
The Great Dismal Swamp is a natural wonder, spanning 2 states and covering 600 square miles. It is beautiful, mysterious, and also deadly. Over the years, hundreds of people have entered the swamp, never to come out again. To this day, there are places where no human being has set foot, and other places where people wished they hadn't set foot.
I was up by the Great Dismal Swamp, and I was in one of the feeder ditches, and there was this beautiful Native American woman coming toward me, rowing ever so gracefully in a canoe. And I remembered it was the legend of the Lady in the Lake. You know, I was glad I was fortunate enough to sit there and see it coming towards me. It was incredible. I'll never forget it.
They made her grave too cold and damp for a soul so warm and true. And now she's gone to the lake of the Dismal Swamp, where all night long, by a firefly lamp, she paddles her bark canoe. These words, penned 100 years ago by Thomas Moore, describe the most famous ghost of the Dismal Swamp, the Lady of the Lake. But she's just one of the many strange phenomena associated with this immense wilderness area.
One of the most famous stories in the Great Dismal Swamp is one that's been passed down as an Indian legend for hundreds of years. It's about a young maiden and a young brave who were to be married. Everyone was looking forward to this wedding because it was the perfect union. Before the wedding date, however, the young maiden became ill and she died. So when it came time for wedding day, the tribe instead had a funeral. The maiden was taken out near one of her favorite spots where she could overlook the lake of the Dismal Swamp. Later, the brave had fallen asleep, and in his dreams, she had come to him, calling to him from a tree that stood near the spot where she was buried. He didn't know what to make of this dream, so he ventured into the swamp to the spot where she lay. He fell asleep there, and again, she came to him in a dream, calling to him to come across the lake to be with her. He brought back a canoe, and he set out into the lake to try to find his bride. The young brave was never seen again. He did not return. But for the past 100 years, visitors to the swamp have seen the brave and his bride in a canoe paddling across the lake of the Dismal Swamp.
Here we are about to enter the Washington Ditch Trail. This will take us right into the Great Dismal Swamp. Most of the swamp is inaccessible by foot, but this is one of the prime locations to go ahead and enter the swamp, especially at night. The reason that we want to focus our investigation on Washington Ditch Trail is because of the numerous sightings of ghosts that have been reported in and around this area. I can definitely say it's very creepy out tonight, and I'm looking forward to getting out and actually seeing something. All right, what I want to do before we go ahead and start down the trail is I want to calibrate both of the devices I'm going to be using tonight. The first of the two is this is a standard off-the-shelf stud finder, and now if anything comes in close proximity to that, it's going to let me know. And ghosts, if ghostly apparitions actually do have some form to them, some density to them, this is going to be the tool that will pick that up. The other tool I'm using is a standard IR temperature gun. This way, if we think that there's something going on, maybe we hear something in the woods, or we just don't feel right, or maybe you feel a cold chill, we can go ahead and point this out into the woods, get a reading on it, and determine whether or not there's anything there. But before we actually step out in the woods, I'm going to calibrate it by getting a baseline reading. And the baseline reading I'm getting right now is about 61 degrees. (63), 63.4, 63.3, 64, 63.5, 64.2. Well, there's a possibility that there is something out there.
The Great Dismal Swamp has a rich legacy of ghostly legends, dating back hundreds of years and passed on through the generations. Are these just folklore, or are they true?
When I first came to the swamp 30-some years ago, it was still a privately owned piece of land before it became a national wildlife refuge. I had the opportunity to meet many of the old-timers here who had hunted and fished for many, many years. And they very often had a lot of interesting stories to tell about the swamp. One night, in the early evening, a good biologist friend of mine came up to my house, and he was obviously very agitated and worried, and he had just been down to the swamp on Washington Ditch. As he rounded the corner to the last little bit to get to the lake, he was rather astonished to see two people walking ahead of him toward the lake. He thought it was very strange because he hadn't passed any cars on the way, and he was coming up on them, of course, to tell them that it was not a good idea to be in here. He noticed that they were wearing very odd clothes, and he described the man as having a fishing pole. So the other very strange thing was that the woman had a dress on, which he found very astonishing because women didn't usually go hiking in their dresses. As he drove up to tell them that they shouldn't be in there or to help them in any way he could, they vanished. As he was telling us this story, I remembered the legend of the fisherman who was lost in the swamp with his bride, and it sounded very much, the description that he gave was of these two people. The very interesting thing was that he never had heard that story or read about that legend in his life, so he had no idea that what he'd actually seen was actually ghosts from an old legend.
Years ago, there was a young lady that lived on the edge of the swamp. And on her wedding day, Her groom-to-be had gone into the swamp to go fishing and bring back the meat for the table for that night after the wedding. It came time for the wedding, and the groom did not reappear. And they all became very worried about him. Well, still decked out in her wedding gown, she went into the swamp looking for her husband-to-be. Well, no one ever saw her again, or the groom. But to this day, fishermen who come into the swamp early in the morning will see a lady on the southern shore fishing, decked out in her bright white wedding gown. If they try to approach her by boat, she disappears into a white mist, and the mist hangs over the water.
It was early in the morning. I think it was around 4 a.m. I couldn't sleep that morning, so I just decided to jump into the boat and go down the swamp and throw a few lines in, see if I could catch something. Went out there, and there wasn't a soul in sight. Again, it was 4 in the morning, and I see this beautiful woman wearing a white dress. And believe it or not, she was fishing as well. Actually, it looked like a wedding dress. Again, there was no one around us, and I thought it was pretty weird of her being there in a white dress fishing. And she noticed me, she smiled. So, of course, I paddled a little ways past her, and I just happened to look back, and she was gone. Looked around a little bit to see if I can find out where she had went. No signs of movement or anything, and it really freaked me out. One minute she's there, the next minute she's gone. Never forget it.
Okay. New ambient temperature is 58 degrees. My stud finder went off. It was on number 2 there, indicating it was whatever it was fairly close if something did actually set it off. Set off meaning that there was something dense enough in front of it to trigger it. 62.2. Number 63 is the fluctuation range I'm going for right now. The needle is not pointing north. The needle is not pointing north. It means there's some kind of magnetic disturbance that is forcing it to go a different way than north. Usually that magnetic disturbance involves a ghost, something paranormal related. 62.9, that's within the range. With all the ghost sightings that have happened in this area and the numerous deaths, violent deaths, tragic deaths that have occurred in this area, it could be anything. It could be something trying to reach out to us. Some long-lost soul that wants to make contact with the living. Maybe they don't even know they're dead. Notice it came from back there, and then as we continued walking, I got no adverse readings. Get to this point, adverse reading. Either it's moving on, or it's staying just out of our range.
I was hunting in the Great Dismal Swamp for probably 2 or 3 hours when I started to hear some voices. Noise, long way out, so I started hiking, getting out towards that area. Got over towards the point there, and I know I heard voices. And as I got closer to them, I knew it wasn't English, but as I got closer, I believe it was French. And it sounded like quite a few. So as I kept going towards that area, and I got to the area, and there was no one there. There was nobody, and the voices stopped. It was incredible, really.
It is said that early in the 19th century, a French pirate ship that had raided gold in the Caribbean was chased up to the eastern coast by the British. In order to evade them, they went up into the canals of the Great Dismal Swamp. When the British followed them up, they came to the ship, but there was no one left on board. They then went into the swamp to try to find the pirates, and they eventually located them. But the treasure and the gold was not to be found anywhere. The British soldiers killed all of the pirates, but it is said that several of them may have escaped into the swamp.
I'll lop your head off now. Where's my gold?
To this day, at dusk, if you listen carefully, you may be able to hear the pirates sitting around their campfire discussing their treasure, speaking in French. But the treasure has never been found.
I think I just heard something. It seemed to come from back where we just came from. What was that? Thought I heard something fall out of that tree or ruffled the tree leaves. Got something on the stud finder. Oh, wow. We're way off now. All right. The compass is now way off base. You're right there. I got a slight reading on the stud finder. The compass appears to be getting more and more off of north. Something is definitely out here. 59, 59.6. I want to go over this. I want to go over the... Something's got to be out here. I don't know if it's following us or what, but something has got to be out here. There's no telling what could be out here. 60.6. I can't say if it's something about this tree, or if something happened in this general area, or if this apparition is, in fact, just following us. Overall, I think we have experienced probably, at the very least, ghostly activity that wreaked havoc with the compass that we used and gave us some strange, generally out of the ordinary temperature readings. Why the apparition chose this night, this place, us, I can't say for sure. What it wants to do, what its methods are, I have no idea. But I can say that something was definitely here tonight.
The swamp is an undisturbed wilderness, a tangle of cypress trees and vines. It's an easy place to get lost in if you aren't careful. But there are also places in the swamp that appear and then disappear.
This is beautiful, sitting here reminiscing about that hike I took about a year ago. Got to hiking through and I saw this little cemetery in the middle of nowhere. So beautiful, so serene. I said to myself, my girlfriend would really like this. It was cemetery plots from the 1800s. So I looked around, I marked it on my GPS, I put it in my book. I took my bandana, I tied it up on the tree, and I knew I was coming back there. Grabbed my girlfriend. Next day, I was all excited. I knew she'd love this. She loves things like this. We looked around. There was nothing. I couldn't understand. I was shocked. Just yesterday, there was a headstone, there was a graveyard, there was a beautiful, serene cemetery here. I couldn't understand. I double-checked. I checked my GPS. I had the right grid coordinates. And I wanted to make sure, because this is nowhere to get stuck in the Dismal Swamp. I looked around. There was nothing there. I knew there was a cemetery. I knew there was a headstone. The only thing left was my bandana. So I knew I wasn't crazy, but I knew something had gone wrong. And I knew I had to get out of the Great Dismal Swamp. I didn't want both of us to be stuck there.
Travis McHenry has come to the swamp in search of another kind of creature. He's been tracking Bigfoot sightings in the swamp.
The area in and around the Great Dismal Swamp has been the location of several Bigfoot sightings over the past 20 years. We also found footprints, 2 separate footprints. One was a 15-inch track, which we found in the mud, and that was pretty apparently a Bigfoot track. 15 inches is about the average size. I had the liberty of being able to make a plaster cast of the footprint I found that day. This is a plastic recreation of that, and as you can see, I've drawn in the bones, reconstructed where the bones would be on the Bigfoot's foot. People usually find footprints that are 15 inches long, and that is commonly associated with Bigfoot activity. Based on the numerous footprints, eyewitness reports, and the sounds which I myself have heard, I am very confident that there is a Bigfoot creature or a group of Bigfoot creatures either living in the Dismal Swamp or using the Dismal Swamp as some kind of migration point.
The Great Dismal Swamp is a fierce, untamable wilderness that has withstood the attempts of humans to control it. It's a protected wilderness area, so it continues to grow wild, keeping its secrets safe inside the tangle of vines and brush that grow in its murky waters.
Chickie's is a very interesting place. Its history goes back to the early 1600s. A local archaeologist found canoes and beads and pottery in a small cave at the foot of Chickie's Rock. There were a lot of burial sites around here from 2 different Indian tribes that lived here. This has been the site of many deaths, whether they were intentional or people just ending their lives because they don't want to live in this world anymore. A lot of rock climbers come to the face of Chickie's and come up and practice their skills. Unfortunately, there have been quite a few that have had to be rescued by the local fire department and rescue teams.
I'm a member of the local search and rescue team, and we had gotten a call that a man had committed suicide up in the wooded area around Chickie's Rock. So our team was dispatched to try to retrieve and recover the body. When we got to site, we split up, which is standard operating procedure to try to cover as much ground as possible, as quickly as possible. I had just cut through some pretty heavy brush down to one of the main access trails. That's a little bit easier walking. Hadn't seen anything yet. Just walking through access road on the trail. So far, nothing yet. Out. Suddenly, I felt an intense cold feeling. I looked off to my right. I didn't really know how to describe this for you. A shadowy figure, very dark, about 8 or 9 feet tall. It actually looked down at me and pointed at me and then disappeared. Just seconds later, this thing popped up over to my left, only about 15 feet from me. It looked like it was about to move towards me, and I don't mind saying it, I was completely terrified, and I got the hell out of there as fast as I could. I will not do any more work up on Chickie's Rock. I won't go back up there to this day.
Sometimes it's tragedy that keeps spirits earthbound. Other times it's unfinished business. But at Chickie's Rock in Pennsylvania, it's believed that somehow the land itself attracts spirits. Is it a vortex? An opening into another world where spirits come and go at will for no apparent reason? You watch, you decide.
I love coming up here to go jogging. It's probably my favorite place to go. I come up whenever I can, mostly on the weekends. I came up not too long ago. I drove up early in the morning, and it was odd. I started hearing this kind of tribal Indian drumming. So I thought maybe there was some kind of ceremony going on. So I started to follow the drum, and it kept getting louder and louder. I don't know if you've ever been around these kind of drum circles, but the sound is unmistakable. The drums are like really deep and resonant. I could actually hear the drumsticks hitting the animal's skin. It was really vivid. The sound kind of led me up this rise. And the moment that I stepped into the clearing, the drum beat stopped mid-beat. Normally a drum will kind of ring on after it stops, kind of echo, but this was sudden dead silence. And there was also this feeling. I felt like some kind of energy, almost like that feeling like someone's watching you kind of thing. I don't know, it's kind of hard to explain.
Well, there's an interesting theory about Chickie's Rock. It concerns ley lines, and apparently where these ley lines intersect, there's increased electromagnetic activity. So that's one theory as to why this area is so haunted.
So I was hiking through the woods about 5 miles from my house, and I was trying to find a good spot to lay out my blind. And I came upon this old foundation of, looked like an old farmhouse or something. And I went to look at the foundation, and out of that came this young Amish couple. They started walking across the foundation, so I was wanting to follow them because it was hunting season after all. It was kind of dangerous for them to be out there. And they were just effortlessly going through branches and brambles, and they went through this really thick briar brush at one point. I had a lot of trouble getting through it, but they just seemed to go through it completely effortlessly. They were approaching the rock, Chickie's Rock, and knowing all the things that go on up there, all the people that jump, they were walking right towards it. So I told them, don't jump.
Don't jump!
And I ran down after them, and they were gone. So I walked back up, and I wanted to retrace my steps. And as I walked back up, I came back across the foundation again, and there they were. And again, they disappeared right into the foundation.
The phenomena at Chickie's Rock is very difficult to explain. The only way I can describe it is that it has a life of its own. At least it seems like that.
So I was working nights at the time, and I didn't get off work until about 3 a.m. that night. And the drive home takes me right past Chickie's Rock. So I'm driving home, this figure, what I thought was a person, appears on the road in front of me, and it was big. Like, I thought it was just this big guy, right? But the closer I got to it, the more I realized that it wasn't a person. With this thing, you could tell it wasn't an animal, right? The glow in his eyes seemed to come from within. I just slammed the horn down, and I look up, and it's gone. So, you know, going to work, I drove by the next morning, and there's no sign of anything. About 2 weeks later, I'm driving and I'm listening to one of those call-in talk radio shows, and I hear this woman describing the exact same thing I experienced.
Tell us about your experience.
This place called Chickie's Rock, and it's actually right around here. I saw something come towards me, and, you know, if I described it, you probably wouldn't believe me, but it was really big, and, you know, it had these eyes that were, you know, they almost glowed.
So I called the DJ, and I begged this guy to give her my number. Yes, I need you to put me through to the DJ.
I'd called into that radio show mostly because I needed to tell somebody my experience. I was driving down the road near the rock when my car stalled. It just died out of nowhere. It was freezing, and I was pretty angry because I had just gotten my car back from the shop the day before. So I got out and I opened the hood, and that's when things got strange. I saw something out in the tree line, and it was making its way towards me. It was big, and its eyes seemed to glow in the dark. And as I got closer, I could see that it was covered with hair, but it was walking like a man. I was terrified, and finally I couldn't take it anymore, and so I slammed the hood down, and, you know, I tried to scare it. When I looked up, that thing was gone, as if it had never been there. The other strange thing is my car started right up, but I, didn't stay to think about things. I just had to get out of there.
It was a relief to talk to someone that could validate what I saw. But the strange thing here is that, in spite of how terrified I was, I'd give anything to have another look at that thing, or to communicate with it. But I think it was a once-in-a-lifetime experience.
I've heard people say that that rock is some kind of gateway that lets creatures from some other reality or dimension cross over to this side. But if that's what that other dimension has, well, I hope they stay where they are, because I never want to see that thing again.
My advice to those who want to come and visit Chickie's Rock is, number one, come during the day. It's a beautiful hike down from local Route 441. Watch out for snakes as you're hiking. Watch out for poison ivy. And don't come alone. And even if you do, you might find out you won't be here alone.
Beacon Hill Park in Victoria, British Columbia is famous for its tranquil beauty. But it is also known as the setting for one of the strangest paranormal events ever documented.
In the early 80s, my wife and I used to get up early in the morning and go jogging in the park. Our regular route took us past this rocky area. We saw a woman there. She seemed to be holding her body in some type of yoga position. She was slim, had blonde hair, and she always had on the same clothes every time we saw her. She had a black top and white pants. She was always facing toward the east, toward the rising sun. And she always had her body in the same position. Her feet were apart, and she had her arms stretched high over her head. Her head was always slightly tilted back, and here's the really strange part. Her mouth was wide open as though she were screaming, but of course there wasn't any sound.
The blonde woman was seen by lots of early morning joggers here at beautiful Beacon Hill Park in Victoria, British Columbia, Canada. They remarked on her pose and what seemed to be her silent scream. The story we're about to tell you is true. However, we've changed the names of some of the people to protect their real identities. Can you be in two places at once? Watch this and find out.
Back in the early 80s, I used to walk my dog through Beacon Hill Park. I remember seeing the woman standing there. She was always standing the same way. She faced east, her legs apart, her hands above her head and her head back a bit. Her mouth was open as if she were trying to shout. The dog started barking, and, I just wanted to check and make sure she was okay. So we went over and asked if she was okay. But it was like she didn't even know we existed. At that point, I felt a little bit bad and kind of silly. It occurred to me that maybe she was doing some sort of a spiritual exercise and I'd interrupted her privacy. So I apologized and we left the park. I saw her a couple of times afterwards, but we just left her alone. And then I was really shocked and confused when I read the stories in the paper.
I worked at Beacon Hill Park from about 1979 when I was a student at university, and I do remember seeing this woman several times. It was only afterwards I realized I never saw her enter the park or leave the rock. I only saw her standing on the rock, always in the early morning and always in the same pose.
We were working at the park as part of the groundskeeping crew. One of the jobs was to walk the park, pick up litter, just make sure the park was clean. So it was November, and there were a lot of leaves, of course. It was a beautiful fall, as usual. We work in teams. We were behind the rock, and there was a lot of leaves all bunched up in this one area. I thought I saw an old shoe, so I went over to clear the leaves and pick up the shoe. And that's when I realized there was something wrong.
He called over to me. I had a radio, so we radioed in and got the authorities at the park to call the police. The police came and we showed them the spot. They were there for a long time, and we, of course, had to wait around to answer questions. So we were there when they took out the body. I couldn't believe what I saw. This was the body of a woman, and I knew who she was the moment I saw her. It was the woman I had seen when I worked mornings, the woman standing on the rock. But something struck me as really odd. I later realized that the woman on the rock had blonde hair and tan skin, but the victim was dark hair. She was a brunette and had very pale skin. It was as if the woman on the rock was a negative version of the murder victim.
The autopsy revealed the woman had been strangled before she was buried in a shallow grave behind the rock. Her husband had reported her missing several months earlier, but based on the condition of the body, she had only been dead a short time. Was the murder victim the same woman who had been seen for several years, standing on the rock, just yards from where her body was discovered? And if so, why did she appear in the reverse image of her true self?
This is a phenomenon called a doppelganger, a German word that means double walker. Traditionally, it was believed that everyone has a shadow or phantom self, and that only the person could see his own doppelganger. But there are many cases that refute this. Cases where family members and others have seen the doppelganger, and a number of stories where whole groups of people have seen the doppelganger and the real person at the same time. Generally, however, the person does not know that his doppelganger is being seen, and this is probably a good thing, because to see a doppelganger is an omen of death. This particular case, the screaming doppelganger in Beacon Hill Park, is interesting for a number of reasons. First, the doppelganger was seen for many years before the woman was murdered, and it was seen by many people. But most interestingly, she was seen as a negative or reverse image of the way she really was in life.
Once the news of this poor woman's murder appeared in the newspapers, many people who had seen her in Beacon Hill Park were shocked and puzzled. But for some, this wasn't the end of the story of the strange woman on the rock.
About 6 weeks after we heard about the murder, my wife and I were out jogging in the park on our regular route when we were stopped dead in our tracks. Up on the rock was the woman again, standing in the same position, her feet apart, arms above her head tilted back, and her mouth open as though she were screaming. And if that isn't enough to stand up the hair on your body, she looked as she did exactly in real life. She had black hair and a pale complexion. She was wearing a white shirt with black pants. And as we stood there, just really stunned, she disappeared.
Her appearances on the rock didn't end when her body was found. She's still seen there from time to time, exactly as she was before, in the same pose. But now it's not the reverse image, it's the way she looked in life. Her murder was never solved,